Welcome to today's session where we discuss an important topic on global and local sustainability, the European Union EU's deforestation regulation, EUDR. The regulation aims to reduce the EU's impacts on global deforestation by focusing on key commodities linked to forest loss. And deforestation is a major issue. Malaysia also included has seen significant loss with 1.92 million hectares disappearing in between 1990 and 2020, and another of 71.9 thousand hectares in 2022 alone. And this has shown the need for urgent action. And for that, I welcome you, our guests, to help us better understanding on the EUDR. I welcome you as Professor Dennis J. Murphy, Emeritus Professor of Plant Biotechnology at the University of South Wales. I want to say thank you very much, Professor Murphy, for joining me. Firstly, maybe you can help us understand and explain the main objectives of EUDR and how does it aims to reduce the EU's impacts on global deforestation and forest degradation.
Sure. This is an outcome of it was the Timber Directive, looking specifically at wood and forests. And now they've expanded it to look at other crops which affect forests by causing deforestation. And there are several different crops have been selected throughout the world which are contributing to deforestation. And deforestation is obviously affecting biodiversity throughout the world. It's contributing to climate change, and this is having big effects throughout the world as well. And so the EU is very concerned about the state of the planet, and so that's why they're also concerned about fair practices in the industry. Mm-hmm. So in these different sectors which they've targeted, they are looking at labour practices to make sure people are not exploited and they get a fair income. And so in Europe we are buying these commodities and we want to make sure they're coming from a sustainable source, mm-hmm. also a safe source, and people are not being harmed in that process. So these are all good reasons for that. Mm-hmm. I think we all agree these are worthy objectives.
Mm. And Professor Murphy, what are the key commodities targeted by the EUDR and why were these particular commodities were chosen?
Right, so they're mostly related to forest loss. So specifically soybean, mm-hmm. that's actually the main one, and cocoa, coffee, mm-hmm. and maize, which I think maybe you call it corn here, but it's maize, and also beef. So these are all commodities which are involved in forest loss. Mm-hmm. And actually, globally, soybean is the most important. It's not all palm, it's actually soybean. Mm-hmm. Because there you're getting a lot of loss of forests in America, in South America, in Brazil, the rainforest in the Amazon. And okay. They're using that rainforest, cutting it down, and bringing cattle. Mm-hmm. So that's why they've targeted cattle and soybeans. They're both contributing to deforestation. And I have to say, Malaysia is actually quite well down on the list okay. in deforestation. Mm-hmm. It's mostly places like Brazil mm-hmm. and actually Indonesia, okay. and not so much Malaysia.
And we're going to dive deep into the Malaysian context, and how will the EU affect the businesses and even we can say industries within the EU, especially those are dealing with commodities like cocoa, salt, and even palm oil?
You mean the Europeans?
Correct.
The European. So basically, this is where the problem is with EUDR. They've put the burden of the regulations back to the producing countries, mm-hmm. and they need to set up systems for traceability okay. and do audits of their value chain to make sure that they comply. All that paperwork has to be done in places like Malaysia, Indonesia, and in Europe they will just be assessing it and saying, yes, that works, or no, that doesn't work. This is causing problems in Europe, actually.
Okay.
We can come back to.
Definitely, we need a very efficient system, and we're hoping from the European Union's deforestation regulation can help bring a better ecosystem within the industry. And what are the main challenges that a company might face to employ the EUDR structures due to diligence and even requirements?
Well, this is really the heart of the problem. The big companies, and I've just been talking to some in the last few days, they're actually quite okay. They've invested a lot of money in it, the big plantation companies, and they've employed people to do all the paperwork, do the audit trails, and set up traceability networks. They're actually ready to go today. The problem is the small companies, because there's about 14 criteria, 4 sets of paperwork, over 1,000 pages. Okay, so if you're a small company, how do you do that? And often you have to get some help in. You have to outsource a company to do that. Big cost. And if you're a small company, the worst is if you're a small holder. Say you're a small farmer in Terengganu, and you have 5 hectares of oil palm with 100 palms. How can you do that? And obviously the government in Malaysia is trying to help with that by helping the small holders, but it's very slow. So they're not ready yet, and that's one reason why in Europe they've agreed to delay. And they've actually delayed the small holders till 2026. So they recognize it's a big problem. Also, it's a cost for everybody. As I say, even the big companies, they're paying a lot of money for this, and they don't get any benefit, except they can continue to export to Europe, which they've been doing for 50 years. So it's kind of a cost but no benefit.
And probably there's a reason probably for the delay, and maybe we need to take a look and identify what's really the core issue, especially for the smallholders, and what measures should be taken or in place to ensure that EUDR is officially enforced across all EU states member, especially the small businesses and stakeholders.
So in places like Malaysia, the smallholders, they've been protesting through organizations like Solidaridad. That's an umbrella group for smallholders. And that's been going to Europe, going to Brussels, and asking them, please, can we have more time? Can we have some help for this? And that's why Europe has actually agreed. And they've agreed to a delay of 18 months for the small farmers. The others, there is a delay of 12 months for the rest of the industry. Well, that's a matter for Europe. That's an internal issue for Europe. And that is up to the Commission. They have powers that they can compel companies, and they could lose their certification. And they might not be allowed to import palm oil, for example. If they are, for example, if they are importing palm oil from a non-EUDR compliant entity, they could lose their ability to import the oil. So they could lose some market.
That is a very significant effect that we have to take a look at very seriously. And to add, assimilation and Indonesia are probably the biggest palm oil producers globally. How do you see this EUDR will impact countries, developed countries like Malaysia and other Southeast Asian countries, in particular in terms of the palm oil industry?
I think it's a matter of time. I think it's going to happen. And as long as we can help everybody in the economy, in the palm oil sector, to become compliant, it's not going to go away. But I think what's happening now, Malaysia's been very successful, and Malaysia, Indonesia, in arguing with the EU. Some of the EUDR regulations are too strict. They need too much paperwork. So I think we now have a year to modify that and soften it a little bit. And so it's kind of making the pill more palatable, we say. You can swallow the pill easier. And so that's the idea. Everybody wants to help and to be successful. We all want to help the environment. And as I say, it's a very worthy target that Europe has. I think they just went too quickly for it, and they didn't think about how complex the industry is. And for example, in Indonesia, there's many more smallholders. I think 3 million. I think in Malaysia, maybe 500,000. So it's more serious in some countries than others. Thailand, you know, or major producers in Southeast Asia. So I think with a bit of help, in 2 years' time, a form of EUDR will be up and running. It will be more user-friendly, and everybody will be compliant. We were facing a scenario, we had a cliff edge in December, where some parts of the economy could not engage with this EUDR. And then what's happening in Europe, the European importers, especially in Germany, they're very scared because they may not be able to import palm oil from Malaysia. It may not be allowed, okay? So they look for another oil. And I know Malaysia and Indonesia are making plans to stop sending to Europe and look for markets elsewhere. In the world. So that would be a fundamental shift. Actually, Europe is the third biggest export destination. First is China, then India. But there are big markets in the Middle East. They're expanding markets, population increase. And I know people in Malaysia are now looking, maybe Europe is just getting too difficult, and they're exploring possibilities to export in the Middle East, in Iran, places like that, Turkey. And they don't have EUDR. So it might not be all bad, even if there is a problem with exporting to Europe for some companies. There might be other markets elsewhere in the world. And I think Malaysian palm oil business is very adaptable, because in the past it has moved to different countries. And actually in the last 10 years, for example, it has expanded in India a lot. A huge amount now goes to India. India used to grow all their own vegetable oil crops. Now they import so much from Malaysia, especially in Indonesia. So, you know, I think we have to be optimistic. The sector is adaptable, okay? So, but we just need to protect the small people, the small guys, you know.
And as you just shared with us, this industry is a bit complex, but over the years we can see the resilience and the adaptability to adapt the changes across all stakeholders within the industry. And probably can share with us what some of the major concerns raised by Malaysia and Indonesia regarding the EUDR, and how the EU address all of these concerns.
I think the initial concerns were, it happened like they just said, here it is, here's the rule, you have to adapt, full stop, with not enough negotiation. And there should have been more engagement with the stakeholders. And also, they were initially just thinking we'd talk to the government in these countries, because the EU normally engages with the nation states, but actually inside a country like Malaysia, there's many different sectors in oil palm business, and they didn't appreciate that, how different it is to be in a big company and be a small farmer. And so I think that was the big challenge. And as I say, there's been a lot of pushback from Malaysia and Indonesia especially, because they're the major exporters to Europe. And actually Malaysia in particular, Malaysia exports a lot to Europe. And they realize, oh, you know, this is actually causing a big problem to ordinary people. It's not just the business. And I have to say, the same thing has happened in other parts of EUDR. You know, we're talking about oil palm, but the same thing has happened with coffee producers throughout the world, in Colombia, for instance, and especially the cocoa producers in Africa. They're having a very hard time because they're all small farmers. And the cocoa goes into chocolate. And the chocolate companies in Europe are very concerned, like Nestle, for example. And so they're realizing, oh, hang on, we're going too quickly. We have to pull back a little bit. So I think that's where we are now. We're in a kind of tipping point now. It's actually good. Only 2 weeks ago, they agreed to postpone. And I think that's the right decision. And it's now become more like a negotiation. We have NGOs, government, industry organizations, farmers groups, all engaging now with the EU. So they learn how the economy is and how they can adjust the rules. So I think the EUDR rules will change in the next year.
With the delay, we have more time for better improvement in the future. Probably, Professor Murphy, how can Malaysia and other ASEAN countries balance within the economic growth and sustainability practices in the light of EUDR?
Right. Okay, so what it's done, it's shone a light on things like emissions of CO2, greenhouse gases. And actually, oil palm is a lovely plant because it absorbs a lot of CO2 from the atmosphere. It's a tropical plant. It grows very quickly. So that's beneficial. But some of the practices, land use in the plantations, for example, using fertilizer, that has caused a lot of emissions of CO2, greenhouse gas. And if they can replace the fertilizer with organic fertilizer, and that's what we're recommending. And the other thing is, if they need to change the land and grow oil palm, never deforestation and no peat. And in fact, we recommend there shouldn't be any oil palm on peat land. Or if there is already, you can manage the peat land by adding water to it, because unfortunately what happens, the peat dries out and it gives off greenhouse gases. And that's bad. That's bad for the EUDR. That's what they don't like. They think oil palm is just emitting greenhouse gases. And actually, it turns out soybean is as well, even more. But we can fix that with these technological fixes, adding water to peat and using the organic fertilizer. And the other thing is, we can use the other parts of the crop as well as the oil. We call that biomass. You know, like the trunk, that's like a tree. We can make that into furniture. And at the conference I'm at today, we just heard some great new technological developments in Malaysia, where they're converting the oil palm trees. At the end of their life, they're cut down, and normally they're just rotting. Now we can convert them into furniture and maybe export that to Europe. And they would like that because the carbon is captured and there's no extra greenhouse gas emissions. So that would make the whole crop more climate friendly for Europe. And I think it would promote it to being more eco-friendly in general.
And we're having more time to implement the European Union Deforestation Regulation, EUDR. It also gives us more opportunity to look what can we upgrade within the sector and industry, including all the major stakeholders, but also within this time, with the delay time, maybe you can share with us what are the things that they should factor in. How might EUDR influence the trade relations between EU and ASEAN countries moving forward?
Well, one thing it shows clearly the importance of having a dialogue, continuous dialogue. And one of the things that we want to do is negotiate with the EU about, they tell us the Malaysian palm oil industry is causing emissions of greenhouse gases. We've done some work and we're now getting a panel of scientists together in Malaysia under MOSTAR, Malaysian Oil Science and Technology Association, and we're going to do a international study, not from Malaysia, these are international scientists from Oxford and Harvard in the US, and we're going to analyze the true value of the emissions and also the sequestration. That's the when the plants capture carbon dioxide, greenhouse gases, remove them from the atmosphere to help climate change. And then we will go back to the EU and negotiate and say, we think that the figures at the moment they have are not accurate. And we need to show the true figures. And then hopefully that means that they will adjust their rating of oil palm as like a greenhouse gas crop to be carbon neutral, even zero carbon crop. And that's what the industry is looking at. We're looking the whole industry becoming zero carbon by, say, 2040, something like that. And that would really help the EU if they had those, the data, and then we can market the palm oil products, the wood and the oil. This is zero carbon, zero deforestation, zero peat, climate friendly, and friendly for the labor force. No forced labor, and friendly for the farmers.
We can see that EUDR is paving the way for regulations, deforestation linked to commodities. And probably you have shared with us what kind of technology is being adapted within the palm oil industries. And we want to take a look at how technologies and innovation be adapted by ASEAN countries to meet the requirements of EUDR, as we know that AI technology is growing faster than we can ever imagine, and it's getting complex. Maybe Professor Murphy can share your thoughts on this.
Sure. And this is already happening in Europe, in our food chain. And specifically, the big thing is traceability and authentication. So if I go to the supermarket and I buy a bottle of olive oil in Europe, and I want to know it's come from a particular place, maybe Italy, because I know they do good olive oil. And so it has a label, virgin olive oil from Italy. I can, with a barcode, I can check that that is authenticated and certified, okay? And that's come from one plantation in Italy. They're called orchards, where they grow the olive trees. Now that requires the traceability in the whole value chain of, say, sending the olive oil in tankers or in trucks, going to a distributor, getting it bottled, going to a supermarket. Each step has to be authenticated. And it's very complex, but what we're using now, we're beginning to use blockchain technology. Okay. And I've just heard today they're implementing, so there's some companies here implementing blockchain technology for palm oil. Because your palm oil here, it might leave the port in Port Klang or somewhere like that, and then it goes to Europe, to Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and then it goes to many different places, and we need to trace every part of that. And you need to know what you buy is really from this plantation in Malaysia, which is RSPO certified, MSPO certified, so good sustainability practice. And that the shopper knows this is a sustainable product. Especially the young people, they do not want to buy anything that's harming the environment. You know, and my students, they say they look at the all of the labels, and for example, we had an example today where there's a Burger King here. They are only selling vegetarian burgers, and there's a huge queue outside in KL. And the young people, they don't want to have the beef anymore because it's destroying the rainforest, the cattle. And so they want the vegetarian burgers. And then you need to say that burger you buy really is from plants, where it came from. Are these plants grown properly? So they're quite intelligent young people. And if there's a barcode or QR code, they can analyze this, and they say, okay, that's from a sustainable source. I will buy that, and I don't mind paying a little bit extra for that. So certainly in Europe we have the very intelligent consumers, and I see in Malaysia the same thing happening. And I think the young people are starting it. It's gradually moving to the older people as well, and they will drive this because, I mean, in my family, my kids and grandkids, they are absolutely passionate about the environment. And sometimes when I used to tell them I work on palm oil, they were a bit upset. And then I have to explain, actually, no, we're fixing everything. And it's not about burning forests anymore. That's historical in the past. And I even work with a zoo in England where they keep orangutan from Malaysia. And they are agreeing with this. Oil palm is a beneficial food for the world, and they're teaching kids in the primary school, so to give them good information. So I think that's driving, it's forcing the people in Malaysia to have the good practice, because if they start cutting forests again, I'm sorry, we'll walk away.
Thank you very much for this valuable insight to Professor Dennis J. Murphy, and the role, or we can see the EU deforestation regulations and its impact. Addressing deforestation requires action from all of us, whether through policies, business practices, and including individual choices. And again, I'll say thank you very much for joining me, and hope to see you again. And this session have highlighted the importance of sustainability efforts like EUDR in protecting our forests. And definitely all of our discussion here will be featured in astroawani.com and across all social media platforms.
Dengan Breeze Power Clean, membersih secara mendalam, menghilangkan kotoran degil sehingga 72 jam kemudian dan berkesan membasmi virus. Breeze Power Clean, luangkan masa, basuh kemudian. Sunsol Anti-Klomoma baharu diperkaya dengan minyak tea tree, aloe vera dan ginseng. Rambut akan bebas dari klomoma, kuat dan sihat. Sunsol Anti-Klomoma baharu dan juga semburkan vitamin mis baharu agar rambut kekal wangi.
Kaulah tuanku.
You're watching The Economy with me, Ibrahim Sani. I'm currently in my office with the venerable and old friend, Dr. Virendrajit Singh. He's moved on from the previous employment that he has. He is currently the Senior Advisor in Tax Policy of KPMG Malaysia, as well as the Vice Chair of Global Tax Commission of the International Chamber of Commerce, or the ICC. So Dr. Virendrajit, let's talk about Geneva. You just came back from there.
Yes.
Holiday?
No, I actually attended the ICC's Global Tax Commission meeting on one day, and then following that, we are actually what we call observer status at the UN Tax Committee. So the UN Tax Committee runs for 4 days. And so we went in after that to observe and give comments where necessary on certain aspects of international tax.
Like global minimum tax?
In a way, but global minimum tax comes under the OECD, and the UN has its own agenda.
Sorry, you took me by surprise. I've never heard of the UN Tax Committee.
The UN Tax Committee is a committee of tax experts. 25 countries have nominees there. Malaysia, unfortunately, doesn't have, but there is an Indonesian rep. And the idea of the UN Tax Committee is built around the UN Double Tax Treaty Convention. Now, for information, there is an OECD Tax Convention, there's a UN Tax Convention. Developing countries tend to use the UN Double Tax Treaty Convention. But Malaysia, for example, uses both. We generally use OECD, but some things are interesting in the UN
like setup,
we can take on board. So some of the things
best
there
of
are
both
withholding
worlds,
tax,
or having the cake and eat it too. Which one is the situation?
Well, I think the OECD traditionally is biased towards developed countries.
Oh, okay.
And the UN thing is biased towards developing countries.
Isn't it aspirational? Sorry, we're running away a bit, but but isn't it aspirational to uphold to the OECD values and framework? For instance, the Securities Commission of Corporate Governance follows the OECD corporate governance framework.
Correct.
Again, it's an aspiration.
That's because the UN doesn't have that particular framework.
So
that's fine.
I see.
So I think what we are just looking at is this fact that the global minimum tax developments that happened did have a framework where they allowed all countries to also come in. Now, what has happened is the African nations put forward a resolution at the UN.
Yang baru ni?
Dah lebih setahun lah. To develop a UN-based international tax framework. And why? Because they felt that all their views given to the OECD when they're discussing this Pillar 1, Pillar 2 global minimum tax have not been considered. They are allowed to say, but in the end of the day, everything goes that way. So this kind of thing.
Of course, why would they prioritize African nations over their own?
So the problem with global minimum tax is the actual administration enforcement is a very, very difficult process. So capacity building.
You went for this conference under the auspices of the ICC.
Yes.
And what are the takeaways that you can actually share with us when it comes to, say, Malaysians' interests?
Yeah, I think some of the things that happened is something to do with they prepare papers which may lead to changes later. For example, they have various papers developed by subcommittees on health taxes. So we already have sugar tax, so that's relevant. They are preparing some papers on wealth tax. And that may well be something that Malaysia will look at later.
Like inheritance tax, for instance.
They haven't introduced anything. They haven't suggested.
This is by the way, paper level.
At that level, the committee has a number of subcommittees, and then they get academics and others, even maybe representatives from ICC, get involved, put papers together, develop and all that.
Can we put our people there, for instance? Is it a possibility?
Well, the challenge is that this is a UN-based thing. So the UN, our delegation to the UN has to nominate. And we used to have a rep. I think the only time we had a representative was over 10 years ago. So the MOF is the one which can control this. But I think, in fact, I've suggested to the Ministry of Finance that maybe we should put a rep there in our committee, put up a case, nominate someone, let's see what happens. The UN Tax Committee is going to be revamped by June next year. These current members have finished their 5 years by then, so it's an opportunity. But again, sometimes the issue is resources and focus, because some people place a lesser focus on international tax developments. But I think now, with global minimum tax, we are really in the game. We have.
What about progressive tax? Is it being discussed heavily there?
Progressive tax, yes, from a point of view of taxing individuals for the capacity to pay. So that's why the wealth tax actually, in many ways, is part of progressive tax. So I think those things are talked about. The other things are talked about is changes in the double tax treaties in terms of how airlines should be taxed and so on and so forth.
Oh, tell me more.
Yeah, because airlines are international. They have exemptions from various
jurisdictions.
So the challenge is trying to, and bear that in mind, the UN focuses on what they call source taxation. So if something is done in your country, you should have the right to tax, which I concur.
Say, for instance, mining companies, for
Yes.
instance.
So obviously you are there, you're mining and so on. Now and you also realize that when the OECD came out with this Pillar 1, Pillar 2, the idea was international tech companies, right, are trading across borders, but in some cases they sell without having a presence in your country, which is how these things have come about.
Netflix, Facebook,
How do
whatever,
we?
Meta.
So developing countries want to know how can we tax them, and that's what has happened in terms of our service tax and so on. We start imposing something on the Netflix subscriptions and all that. So these are all part and parcel of what's happening in the UN discussions, and then countries take that on board and try. And issue is the tax base in developing countries is small. We need more tax revenue to do what we need to do. The aging economy, and so on and so forth, right? So I think it is important for us to know what's happening in the UN as well as the OECD and try to blend the two. So that was what I was doing in those days. And this is the first time I've been out of the country when the budget was presented.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I came back on a Sunday.
Let's talk about the budget, because it's been 10 years. Every year, I don't know whether you're aware, but every year since 2014, I have invited you on my show to talk about tax.
Almost every year, yes.
Almost every year. That's how sad my life is now. From BFM to Astro and now here. What are your thinking when it comes to Belanjawan 2025?
Okay. The point I always make is that we need to be focused on the fact that this is just a one-year plan. And what we need to be, and this is where it is, I've mentioned in various places that the budget becomes a bit of sometimes what happens pre and post is something like a circus. We all want to know what's in it for us. That's not the objective of a budget, if I may step back for a moment.
And you're not the first person to say this.
The objective of the budget is actually tied to the 5-year Malaysia plans. And then that 5-year Malaysian plans is where we should have a lot more debate and discussion, whether that 5-year plan is robust or not, things missing, and usually there are things missing. I'll come to that later. The 1-year plan, the budget, is really to set direction so that we are still on course to achieving what is stated in the 5-year plan. So sometimes what happens is that we get overly excited when we see nothing there in terms of new tax measures. Why should there be new tax measures if we have existing taxes which are doing their work well, right? And
consisted upon the original 5-year plan, in this case the 12 Malaysia plan.
Correct. So what has happened in terms of our current budget, 2025? I must say that in the last 3 budgets, we're starting to see a situation where difficult decisions are being made, right?
Bearing in mind that they are presented by different prime ministers and finance ministers.
Correct. It doesn't matter who the finance minister is, as long as that government in place is the same. In our case, at the moment, 3 budgets is unity government. So what we are seeing is difficult decisions being made. But together with the difficult decisions, we are seeing a lot of other little handouts being also made, because the idea is to balance the game, placate those who feel disenfranchised and so on.
And also perhaps trying to stay true to some of the political parties' mandate and governing ideas or philosophy. Social justice
but
is
this is the challenge with having a unity government, right? You can't really push your way.
Roja is the favorite dish of all Malaysians.
Correct. So I think we are what we are, and therefore, having said that, we are seeing subsidy rationalization, for example. We all know that had to be done. Only question is when. So I think it's great that the government has started the process, but it is getting delayed for various reasons. So the diesel subsidy rationalization, I think, in the end went well. So we had savings, but unfortunately, a lot of these savings immediately gets promised for other things. Are those particular reasons why we are using the savings, are they really relevant? That's something else for another day. But that's the objective. Why do we have to do this? Because our tax base is very narrow. We have a very narrow tax base, which is why you look at tax revenue to GDP. We always lament that we are one of the lowest in the region.
11 or 12%.
Yeah, almost 12%. Lowest in the region. So even when
next closest thing is actually 16, if I'm not mistaken, some to the Philippines.
Yeah.
Everybody else is 20s.
Correct. So even when I was in the Tax Reform Committee of the MOF in 2018, one of the questions we did raise is why is it that our tax revenue to GDP ratio is low? We don't really get much response, other than say that we do our best, we raise whatever we try to collect. Part of the reason, however, and I've said this in many, I've been consistent in the programs that I've come up with you and in my articles, we have 15% of the labor force, working population, actually subject to income tax, personal taxes, right? And we know why, because wage levels are low. And we have given a lot of exemptions over the past many years, again populist, and we give so many personal reliefs, so much so that many earning 4,000 a month are out of the net. Okay, so can we go back to lowering the thresholds? You know the pushback, but actually we can slide, because if you pay a small few dollars or ringgit, you actually, the psychological aspect is you become part of the system. You then realize that I'm paying. And one of the bugbears we had when GST came in was that many said, I don't pay income taxes, how come you're now imposing GST on things I buy? And this is where then you had to placate them with transfer payments, cash payments to help the lower, the less, right? So one is our base in terms of personal taxes. Second is our base in terms of our corporate taxes and the business sector. We have too many incentives, double deductions, special deductions. And one of the things that my tax reform committee did suggest, and I think the ministry is aware of it, is that we need to take away many of these double deductions, special deductions, because have they run out in terms of the purpose they're supposed to achieve? And the broader game is that the tax incentives that we give, pioneer status, investment tax allowance, the government is aware, they are reviewing it slowly, and we have been told a new investment incentive framework, NIF, will be introduced sometime in the third quarter next year, which is quite late. We've been talking about a new revised incentive framework for the past 5-6 years. The challenge we have, and this is clear empirical data, is that when we have had MOF engage various studies from the World Bank, IMF, results always come out that our incentive structure is too generous. But the question is, how do we change it? Foreign investors want a lot of incentives. The question for us is, do we need that particular foreign investment in that sector? So I think this is where, in the past, in order to move along, we just encourage, we took on everyone.
160 billion actually.
Everyone, because you get jobs, you get this, why not?
Across various sectors, semiconductor, construction, you name it.
Even though some of these sectors are sectors that we actually feel that we have critical mass, but we allow it. So this is where the new investment incentive framework will probably help. So because of that, we have a narrow base. So it's something that we have done to ourselves, right? So therefore now...
You say it as if it's a self-inflicted...
it is self-inflicted, but some of the things like externalities influence you as well, right? Personal tax personal tax base is narrow, is self-inflicted. Corporate taxes, there are issues because we want to encourage foreign investors, so we give away too much. Again, it's back to outcome-based. So the Anwar has introduced this thing about outcome-based in the sense of incentives. I will have KPIs. But I hope that will be really robustly followed through when you
Which is important for us to now talk a little bit more about our Malaysia plan. We are at the precipice of inviting the new Malaysia plan, the 13th Malaysia plan. It's going to be kicking into action 1st January next year, 2026. And so this is the final year. 2025 is going to be the final year to check 12th Malaysia plan, which has gone through several iterations because of several governments being put in place. And despite the hodgepodge notion of the unity government, it's still one government for the past 3 budgets. So that's something that needs to be I guess, heralded on. The next 5 years is extremely critical, because can we get a final 5-year plan that can be put in place for us to actually work on quite robustly? So remember that you mentioned just now things that were missing, and you want to talk about it later. Let's talk about it now.
So I think when you come to the 5-year plan, obviously the economy ministry is the one looking into all this. And the challenge here is we consult, we get consultants involved. We need to scour the world in terms of all the various things. We know AI, we know technology, high value add, all these are the big terms. The question really at the end of the day is which sectors, and we all know that nowadays we are looking at services. There's no more real manufacturing as we knew it. So when you go back to semiconductors and so on, we have a very big, strong E&E sector, to which we give tremendous tax incentives because it's export-based as well.
Also, that's how we get our Infineons and Intels to come in.
But be very clear that if you take away the incentives, they move on.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the catch-22 that we have.
Yes.
And now with this global minimum tax coming in, this particular foreign investors are asking, what will you give in exchange for me paying the additional tax? All right. So I'm paying, let's say, 0 or 5%. If I work out the formulas, I'm supposed to pay 15. I'll top up, let's say, 10. What are you going to do for me? Because look, you gave incentives. They're not supposed to pay anything, right? So you now need to give me. So that's where this particular new investment incentive framework came in. There's a 1 billion fund I think they want to set up.
Also a multi-year tax framework, actually.
Yes, which will be tied to perhaps transfer of technology, labor, R&D. Again, nothing new. We've always had this transfer of technology requirements.
Since the 1970s.
Yeah, since the Japanese came in as well. So the question now for us is, what kind of sectors do we want to focus on? And we should tie it with the resources we have. And I come back to one very important point, agriculture, land. We have huge amounts. We have so many smallholders around. Mechanized agriculture is one way to go, but it needs quite a bit of investment.
And coordination, actually.
Yes, but it can be done. It's just that, well, unfortunately, there are political agendas in this issue.
Yeah, especially for smallholders in various sectors and various, what we call this, various states.
Yes. So we have challenges, but look, food sufficiency is a crucial thing, right?
Yeah.
Look at what happened during the pandemic and how the supply chains were all held back, and what do we do? So isn't foods, at one point we had food sufficiency was meant to be our top of the game, and now
but now if you look at the SRR food sufficiency ratio, I think only was it chili or some brinjal or something like that. That was the only one that's above 100%. The rest is all
imported. So I come back to another aspect, which is, I mean, disconnected in the bigger picture. This thing about cost of living, right? This is a factor that will always, cost of living is always going to go up, right? We all know this. But I give you a simple example. Before I left for Geneva, my wife went to the supermarket and got avocados, all right? Okay. 22.90.
My God, I swear to God, I didn't want to mention avocados, but
it's okay.
My God, okay, let's talk about avocados.
So
now.
Yesterday, we went to the grocer, same grocer that she buys from, is 24.90, from 22.90 to 24.90. What is the explanation for this increase? Obviously, you ask the people there, the manager, the outlet, they won't tell you anything. This is supplier. You go to another grocer somewhere and selling the same product, 17.90. And you wonder, how does this happen? And then you also wonder, as a citizen, what is the ministry doing about this? The ministries tend to act only when there's a complaint. But is that the way we should play the game? So these are challenges.
This is the KPD NHEP, for instance.
Yes. And that was a ministry which was involved in the GST when we were trying to look at anti-profiteering.
Yes.
And with due respect, it failed miserably because it wasn't attuned to that. The customs authority should be the ones managing this. We'll talk about GST later as well. But from the point of view of the...
but it's okay.
So this particular Malaysia plan, one thing I want to see is a bigger focus, larger focus, substantial focus on fiscal policy, tax policy. Let me just tell you that, and come back a little bit, we'll pop in and out, budgets,
no problem.
All right? One of the challenges we have is, of the last 3 years, Anwar's budgets have been good, in a sense, because you actually taking the bull by the horns and doing something. But at the same time, he needs more tax revenue, right? You cannot increase your corporate tax rates because you're one of the highest. Your personal tax rates also are pretty high. So what do? You then say, let's go for the people who have the ability to pay. Now, you then start imposing certain things like capital gains tax, which I don't have a issue with that. But eventually, the challenge is, what do we want the foreign investors to see Malaysia as? And do we want a lot of taxes so that in the end of the day, we become a country that they move away from? Okay, number one. So capital gain tax as it is, nothing wrong with that. But you just need to handle it carefully. And so the challenge now is, we introduced that. We now have a dividend tax of 2%. And then we talked about high value goods tax. So the challenge here is, what message is going out to the business community? The message, unfortunately, coming out is, every year something else is going to come up as we scrape the barrel to raise some additional revenue. Is that good for business? No. Because businesses need clarity, certainty. They need a pathway.
Not just clarity and certainty for one particular time frame.
No, long term.
A multi-year.
Yeah. So I come back to the Malaysia plan. And the Malaysia plan needs to have a focus, and I hope there will be a substantial chapter on this tax policy framework. And I am an advocate of saying, a 5-year, 5 to 7 or whatever number of years, let's look at some kind of a framework of how we're going to improve our tax revenue to GDP ratio, and how we're going to raise the tax revenue. What are the strategies that we have? It doesn't mean that whatever you state there is cast in stone. To me, sharing this with the greater audience is about allowing consultation. It's about allowing feedback. And then you can rewind it, change it a bit, and so on. So once you set out a framework, it allows visibility. It may spook some, but at the same time, let's be honest about it. We know our tax revenue to GDP ratio has to go up. We know we need to fund healthcare, age society, and so on. So we need that. I think people are aware of it. Of course, people say, don't take it from me, that's all.
No, but the two things that I keep on tracking every year since I started this journey in 2014 are two. Number one, tax to GDP ratio, which has been rising, but very slowly. From 10% to 12% over the past 10 years. But the deficit, because it was rising prior to 1MDB, and then it kind of managed, Tun Mahathir's time kind of brought it down, but then again, it shot up again because of the pandemic. But it has been brought down now, steadily, year on year. And if I'm not mistaken, it's at 3.4, 3.6 right now, if I'm not mistaken. Isn't this part of that whole notion of hitting that 3.0, that magic number, that infatuation of how we need to have a 3% deficit?
The even better number will be a 0, right? Balanced budget eventually. But, but the point is, yes, look, you're an accountant, I'm an accountant. When you look at managing this, it's revenue, expenditure. Simple as that. The question we have is, we know that the government's operating expenditure is literally cast in stone. But to be fair, 60 to 70% is cast, but the other balance, you have flexibility. What are we doing about that? But this is where ministries sometimes work in silo, but the Ministry of Finance has the overarching hold on this. Have you ever seen a ministry having a lower budget allocation than the preceding year?
No.
Right?
Every year is the biggest budget of the year.
So the question at the end of the day is, we need to cut somewhere. Certain types of expenditure, and I think the Prime Minister did mention during his speech there was something about 68 officials wanting to
go somewhere, for some
that's a drop in the ocean. I'm sure there are many other situations where trips are made which may not be necessary. Nowadays with Teams and online, a lot of things you can do it at home.
But it's still not structurally
Yes.
material for us to find savings from.
Correct. But let's look at it, this is a small drop in the ocean.
Sure.
But based on that, we need to have a more robust approach, managing expenditure. So budgeting is not about increasing revenue and keeping expenditure where it is. Budgeting is also about increasing revenue and trying to manage your expenditure. So I think it's doing that pretty well. But as we rationalize our subsidies, we have savings, right? But it gets spent very easily. Maybe it shouldn't. But maybe that should be put away, and then we need to build some reserves for a pandemic that may come about in the future. And so these are challenges that only politicians can undertake to commit on. And this is where the challenge is that we want to be popular as well. I mean, I don't blame them. We want to be populist. We need to be seen to be doing things for everyone. And I come back to another interesting point that both of us benefit from anyway, personal reliefs, right? Why are we continuing to give personal reliefs, extending it and all that? Scope, I don't have a problem. Same amount, you widen to grandparents, parents, perfectly all right. But if you increase that amount, you're reducing the base further of personal income tax. So the question is, why do we keep doing that? And I'm saying this because 15% of the working force actually pays income taxes. So you're actually benefiting only this 15% of the workforce. And if I, as accountants, as business people, you need to go for the maximum gain possible. But this 15% is not going to dent. Again, it's populist. So
even then it's strange, right? Because it's populist towards urbanites.
Yes.
This means nothing.
Nothing to the rest.
To the outside,
and the percentage distribution as well. But one good thing that came out in the budget, and I see that will be coming up probably in the Malaysia plan, is this thing about moving development across the country. And
dispersing developmental growth.
We tried to do that some years ago by giving some incentives for people who locate in certain areas. It didn't really.
But that was the function of the corridors as well.
Correct. And the corridors have created, I think, have done well, especially Iskandar, I guess. But the areas beyond that are still in a bit of a doldrums, right? So it doesn't really mean that we need to create more corridors, because that has its pros and cons, but it's really moving development across the country, and in fact, in Sabah, Sarawak and so on. And that, I think, is a good thing. But the problem here is that if you don't have the resources and the mechanisms and local councils who are up to the mark to actually welcome investors, you run into the same issue. People may want to go there and later pull out, right?
Isn't this then a problem of talent growth, talent development as well? Because if you look at it, you know, it's the government servants that is critical in this. Local councillors.
Correct.
I don't mind that random crops of politicians that come and go, because they are, you know, they are the flavour of the month, I suppose, whatever the populace needs. But the machinery behind it, do you feel that that talent focus is going to be very critical right now, especially when it comes to good governance?
I agree, and that also is tied to education.
Yes.
And so education and what I call continuous learning in the right areas. I won't talk about the HRD's fiasco, because that's another story. The courses, the training, are we actually doing and giving the right type of training? So you come back to governance, you come to the ethics, you come back to Auditor General's reports on various things, and we don't seem to have a finality to this. For example, Auditor General comes out with all kinds of findings. What do we see in terms of outcomes, right? So I think
HRD Corp is the best example. No matter how much findings is found.
And even when I was the president of the Malaysian Institute of Accountants, HRD wanted to widen its scope to say pay the contributions and all that.
Levy,
and then MIA used to run hundreds of courses on their own, and so that became an issue. But they pushed it through at the end of the day, despite all of it.
On office bearer at MIA?
No, I finished my term in 2022.
Oh, okay.
But I'm now chairman of the Ethics Standards Board, but that's not in the council. But
it's still a
I'm still there somehow.
But
Yep.
And then, of course, then next year, the Auditor General did mention next year we're going to audit over 2,000 agencies.
Now, I don't know where that's coming from, because in the end of the day, great stuff, where are the resources? So in the end of the day, Auditor General may rely on outsourcing, which is the way they've been doing it in the past. So I didn't quite understand this, because the MIA, for example, the Auditor General audits the MIA accounts, but they in the past have always outsourced this to some accounting firms, smaller accounting firms as well. So why does the Auditor General feel that she can cover all these thousands of agencies? So does it mean that it's going to be more staffing, additions? But importantly enough, the tools to do the audits. Are we upgrading the Auditor General's department to the level? And I think that's important.
Increasing capability and competency.
Yes. So when you come to this, the Malaysia plan, that focus on talent, capability, and resources, manpower, is a crucial thing.
But what's the point of creating more competencies for auditors if nothing gets acted upon?
Correct.
Once
So,
the finding is
correct. So it's not only auditors, it's our
the whole
other
funnel, the whole gamut.
Yeah, and it may not work, may not substantially come to realization in 5 years, but look, you've set the thing in motion. It doesn't mean you're trying to only work for 5 years, right? So you need that. But again, in the end of the day, someone will come back to you and say, I need funding for all this, right? So you need to play a smart game and pick out where you can and so on and so forth. And similarly, if you look at LRT and all that, this wasn't announced, but more costs were being incurred. But the other aspect of the Malaysia plan is actually public transport. I think we should continue to do that. Look, I travel on the MRT.
See, this is an oxymoron that I keep on mentioning.
Yeah.
We want to build an automotive industry.
Yes.
We want to make sure that every Malaysian has a car, at least one car.
Yeah.
But in reality is that we all have 2 cars at least, with a motorcycle to boot, and then at the same time everybody must take the public transportation.
Correct.
So what is what?
Yeah, but if you look at the MRT and LRT, okay, I travel by MRT now. I came here on the train.
Congrats, Walter.
And where possible, I do that.
Yes.
If it's connected, I always look at where it is connected, and if it works well for me, why not?
Yeah.
And I've gone to TRX on the train as well. So look, if you provide those facilities, eventually people will take it. But it's a time-based thing. It'll take a while. So I do think public transport has a tremendous role.
Yes, and it should.
It should, and that has
but
to
then
be pushed.
We're supposed to grow our automotive industry as well.
Correct.
So how?
So this is the dilemma that we have, right? We encourage more auto players to come in as well.
Yeah.
And then the other aspect is electric vehicles, ultimately, and then public transport. But so the challenge is something has to give, and public transportation should give way to the push on the auto sector. But there are losses that you will have, excise duties and so on.
Yeah.
So when you look at revamping your tax structure, don't forget that the auto industry, you buy a car and how much of excise duties you pay is a very significant part of this as well. So I think there's a lot that we have to do and look at seriously. I'm sure the Economy Ministry is looking at all these aspects. But I also feel that sometimes we keep doing both. Simply for the sake of doing it. We're doing both. Public transport, auto, that doesn't matter. You create labor, you create some jobs and all that, fine. And wait for another government to solve that problem.
Okay.
So that's it.
We'll go for one short break. When we come back, we'll discuss a little bit more with Dr. Virendrajit Singh.
Yeah.
Baharu Magnum Mango Yogurt Parfait. Ice cream yogurt pusaran sos mangga. Coklat putih Belgian tebal. Magnum Mango Yogurt Parfait. Kenikmatan sejati.
Kenapa semua rambut dalam iklan bersinar? Sebab pakai penapis foto. Untuk rambut terhidrat bersinar, cuba Dove Baharu. Diperkaya dengan kompleks hair keratin. Menghidrat secara mendalam untuk 72 jam. Rambut bersinar tanpa penapis foto. Baharu, Dove Hair Keratin Shine.
Penyasaran subsidi diesel di Semenanjung tidak akan memberi kesan kepada harga barangan keperluan di Sabah, Sarawak dan Labuan.
660 individu berusia bawah 21 tahun di Sarawak telah diberikan kewarganegaraan.
Sarawak kini menjalinkan kerjasama dengan Bank Dunia dalam menjayakan perdagangan karbonnya.
Thanks for staying on with us. I have with me the Vice Chair of the ICC in my office, actually, quite literally, Dr. Virendrajit Singh. And now
it's accessible by MRT, yes.
It is accessible by MRT. I mean, it's we always stay close to an MRT outlet wherever we set up shop, or LRT. Okay, now I have to talk about the elephant in the room, GST.
Sure.
Prime Minister did say that the minimum wage has to hit at least 3,000 ringgit before we can even start to contemplate on implementing GST. But then again, when he increased the minimum wage from 1,005 to 1,007, you have organizations like the MEF and many more just basically, you know, threw up in arms, ruckus, business will fail, die, people on the streets.
As we expected, yeah.
Yalah, betul lah tu. But every time it's like that.
Yeah.
Okay. So what do we want? We want 3,000 ringgit then GST or 1,005?
No.
Apa ni? Apa lagi? Satu lagi? EPF contributions for foreign workers.
Yeah. So if you talk about the EPF contribution, minimum wage, and then GST, all right? EPF contribution, I think, is a good idea. By the way, Singapore does that. All the foreign workers
into CPF.
Yeah, you pay CPF and you can't take it out until you reach retirement age.
No, actually they can if they leave the country.
Yeah.
Permanently,
but yeah. I still know some people who have left it permanently and come back to Malaysia and only was able to take it out when this person reached 60.
Yeah.
And they applied.
But even then they can't take it lump sum if I remember correctly.
In this case she
could. Okay.
Maybe
but if you're a Singaporean, living subsistence allowance kind of notion, you can't take it out.
So in Malaysia, question we have is, what are we planning to do? Are we saying foreign workers contribute, and then when they finish the contract and they leave Malaysia, they take it all out? Or are you going to leave it there until they reach 60 years, then they take it out? Now, if you leave it there, it's great for EPF because we have a pool of funds we can invest.
Large AUM.
So I think that's a question that the EPF is working on and will come out with a statement. Singapore is a good example, but there are other countries where you are allowed to take off the moment you leave the country, right? So then you have lots of inflows, outflows. The good thing about this suggestion of EPF is that we are always concerned about foreign workers sending money back regularly.
Yeah, remittance.
By putting this in, you're capturing a little bit of that here. So in that sense, that's one item that we are probably interested in. But to the employers, they have to pay employers' portion. Employees is fine, but employers' portion cost. Minimum wage, 1.5 to 1.7, again cost. So they are a bit up in arms. But the reality of life is that if you ask anyone, an SME or even the big business, is 1,500 enough to make a living? We all know it's not enough in KL and the developed in Penang or Johor, but it's okay maybe when you are further away. They realize that. But yet, the issue is we've got to look at our business, our profits.
I spoke to a friend of mine who has a cafe.
Yeah.
He told me, because he has 2 outlets in KK.
Yeah.
And he shut down one outlet in anticipation of, he's planning to shut down one outlet in anticipation of this. So that this is how he manages his business, so that he can then increase the menu prices. So that, of course, it comes hand in hand, because then there would be an increase of service quality. So instead of having 20 staff, 10 in each outlet, he will shut down one, consolidate, maybe even have some redundancies and remove them. But at the same time increase, say, his latte 6 ringgit to 10 ringgit, but perhaps with other services to ensure that, that.
But that's one way of running a business. But in the end of the day, the question is, will this, and you're right, this will impact small businesses more, all right? And this may lead to exactly what you just said, some people consolidating and therefore reducing their number of outlets. Is that good or bad? Obviously it's bad. for the greater good in terms of employment creation. But the reality is, we know our wages are low. And we know that average wages of Malaysians are low. So what the Prime Minister is saying is correct, but I come back to another point. Is that enough to say that's why we shouldn't have a GST or VAT?
Yeah.
The answer fundamentally is not really, but I understand where the Prime Minister's ball game is, in the sense that if we raise wage levels, introduce GST, there's more acceptability. That I totally agree with. So I think that's one way of articulating. But I come back to another point that if you look at Indonesia, you look at Philippines, they have a VAT. And look at their wage levels, also about the same.
Suppressed, yeah.
Right? So you can have VAT even though your wage levels are low, but I think the philosophy that Anwar mentioned is also something we can accept it. Let's wait for a while. Therefore, I feel, and I have said this to the relevant parties in government, that let's work with our current SST, the sales tax, service tax. Let's try to widen the scope, which has been started last year and also this year. And why is this? Because GST used to cover almost 70% of goods and services. SST doesn't. It's much, much less. In fact, in the 3 years ago, it was only 38%. So we're now slowly starting to widen it. And that is why we are collecting less under SST compared to,
of course,
we always compare, right?
Yeah.
So we need to
for the short-lived GST period, there was I remember a graph that was showing the comparisons of collection between SST and GST. And
correct. So at the end of the day, we are not comparing like with like.
No, it's not
apples and oranges. Everybody comes out in the media, or even ministers or some other.
Or GST macam
not
ni,
comparing.
yeah.
And the other, so the issue was less goods, and the base was wider in GST, narrower in SST. Now it's starting to slowly increase it. Secondly, is the fact that we have a lot of exemptions under SST. That's why the base is narrow. So we need to take away the exemptions. We take away cost of living, again, issues, right? So I have suggested, and I think the government is receptive at the moment, that we'll work with the SST. But the problem with the SST, especially sales tax, is the cascading of taxes, which you are familiar with, and I hope the audience as well, where the idea is it doesn't matter where you are, as long as that particular product is taxable, you sell to somebody else, you charge. And then that person
cascading.
Has charges to another. Yeah. What they are doing, and they have done this for certain sectors in the last few years, is giving exemptions to certain sectors,
level of levels.
So I use the example of sub-manufacturers. And so when you start off with buying and importing a product, and then you move to another manufacturer, let's make a small part of it, another sub-manufacturer, and so on, ultimately you sell to the wholesaler only then. At the last stage,
the finished goods
you charge your 5 or 10%. And that is what I think the ministry and the customs has started adapting to that. All right? Because you don't have the input-output credits that we used to have in GST, but you will have to do this exemption. And they also do that for the advertising industry. That was introduced few years back.
Yeah, or any other services-based
but not everyone enjoys this. So if you do that, tough as it is, you actually have something almost similar to the GST.
But this will unearth any grey areas that were not being taxed before.
Correct.
That was the point.
Yes.
The grey market is so
huge. Correct. And I come back to another point on GST. This is about the fact that e-invoicing.
I was about to say that. You jumped the gun. Right.
Well, e-invoicing to me is a game changer. All right, because at the end of the day,
it was hard to implement or painful to implement. Not hard, just painful to implement for companies making more than, what was it, 500 million?
Yes.
And of course, now it's going to be more than 100 million soon enough. And then, of course, everyone will face it by July.
But the point was, we are exempting MSMEs. 150,000 turnover and below. Which is a
wrong, 5 employees or something
which is a wrong step. but I think populist again. So for time being, it's fine. E-invoicing, however, can only work.
Why do you say that as if it's a bad thing? It's a good thing, or else this government wouldn't be in power.
No. The problem is, I'm looking at it from the point of view of...
the tax guy, yeah,
right?
okay.
From the point of view what is good for the country, not what is good for the politician.
Yeah.
So from the country's perspective, e-invoicing must be all-encompassing.
Okay.
Everyone that is giving a service must cover. So eventually, they will bring in the MSMEs, and I'm giving a 3 to a maximum 5-year timeline for e-invoicing to fully
I think it is within that timeline, isn't it? The government is very certain.
Correct.
And this wasn't initiated by this government. It was done by the previous government as well. So at least they're consistent in that sense.
Correct. So this should become part of the Malaysia plan in terms of fiscal policy. This must be clearly focused on. And why this is so? Because data, right? Somebody's invoice, sales invoice is another person's purchase, and you can, in a way, you can track it.
Yeah.
So you'll have a lot more information. Helps the audits of the Inner Revenue Board and so on, even customs, by the way.
Yeah.
One of the things of e-invoicing is this: it actually also will help customs. And by the way, when it was first promulgated, customs was not involved.
Yeah, it was under the KPD.
So the industry came in and said, look, I don't want customs to come up with their own invoicing. So that's good. That's a good way to do it. So MOF listened, they combined. So this will then replace effectively your tax invoice that we talk about in GST.
Yeah.
All right. Now, when you have e-invoicing done by everyone, after some guidance, education, and so on, you then have a situation where even the underground economy, traders who are not in the net, will have to issue an e-invoice, because the point will be, if I don't have an electronic invoice issued, I don't get a tax deduction if you are supposed to be paying taxes. So I think that becomes...
So there is no incentive for me to conduct business with you at all.
Yeah. So to me, that is very effective. Now, so what I've said to some of the officials in the MOF as well, if e-invoicing is in full implementation stage, if you are comfortable that it actually, you now have a full view of the retail sector. By the way, why do I focus on retail sector? Because when you talk of GST, the retail sector is the weakest link in the chain, which is why they've had multiple stage so that you can track via the invoice.
Yeah, I understand.
All right? So if you have full control of the retail sector,
full view of the retail sector,
through invoicing, you can introduce a retail sales tax, and that's it.
And of course, then it does a better job at calculating the domestic consumption measurement of the economy and our local GDP, and then understand a little bit better on the DI, perhaps.
And you collect exactly what a GST is aimed to collecting. The GST doesn't have everybody registered. Now you only need to register a retail side. So that is what I think can be done by the government. Call it whatever you like at the time. And we will, but you have to be very sure that this is implemented well. And,
I don't see any opposition other than the tax department of the various...
The small traders, actually the Inner Revenue is going to come out with some kind of a mobile app to help the smaller players. Now let's see how that works, but that is the way it is. I've said many times, the traders in the markets and the pasar malam, they use touch and go, they use QR codes. They can. If you produce a mobile app which is easier to use, explain to them,
they will
can
adopt.
do that.
They will.
So the only thing about e-invoicing is you need a tax number of the other party or the IC card for individual, and you need to give that. Problem in Malaysians is we are all very. We seem to be enforcing the PDPA very strictly to our own personal selves. So any information that we give, we worry. So I think that's where we have to. You make it compulsory. You give information. You enable everyone to be on the invoice.
But there also has to be some sort of incentives at the individual level. So, more tax breaks, for instance, or something, more reliefs. I don't know.
I don't know. I think at the end of the day, you need to get the businesses to do this first. And
include the smallholders, the small businesses.
And the individuals will slowly go in line. Okay, you and I will have no choice. You don't want to give your tax file number, you give your IC. I think it will work. And therefore, this talk about GST, SST, to me, can be resolved easily. And we need a retail sales tax across all goods and services. Some very essential items can be excluded, but very small, and that's it. Now, the other aspect is about transfer payments, helping the needy and whatever, right? The philosophy in tax policy now...
Not transfer pricing, transfer payments.
Payments.
Okay.
Cash payments.
Okay.
So, previously, when you looked at tax policy 10, 15 years ago, it's about, okay, let's say look at GST, higher rates for luxury goods, smaller rates for essentials, whatever, or exemptions. So a multiple. That becomes complex. Okay. The new philosophy and policy approach is tax everyone at the same rate. Okay, and then for GST, for example, apply the same rate,
whatever
6%, or even subsidy rationalization. Everybody pays the same. Then,
regardless of your disposable income.
And then you determine through database, whatever, who are the parties that need transfer payments or cash payments to assist them. And that's the new philosophy that is being done. And that, I think, is the most effective approach. So I come back to your RON 95 as well. Actually, what's so difficult about it? Because right now the market price, I'm told, is probably, if you go up, is about 270.
No, you can't do that, because only when the crude Brent oil is $70, then let's enjoy.
So let's do
this. But
this.
It can go up to 130.
Agree. But let's do this. Let's look at floating the price, 50 cents, 20 cents, whatever, progressively. And everyone pays that. But you have your data to help the smaller players, the businesses, individuals. But you need that data. And this is where I worry sometimes about how good is our database.
But Padu was the original idea to capture
but that ran into quite a number of issues as well. Not everybody is on Padu. In fact, by the way, I tried going into Padu 5 times. I just couldn't get into the website. So the point is, data capture is very important, and I do think that's the best way to go. Now, however, the government is talking about RON 95 petrol subsidy by only charging the so-called T15 a higher rate, and everyone else pays the subsidy. That's going to be very difficult to implement. I think we know that. Is it by a card, fleet card? How? Petrol dealers are also coming out saying that this is not very difficult to implement. So I think the answer is float the price and assist those who need by transfer payments, like what we do for the previous BRIM and all that. Sumbangan Bantuan Rahmah.
SDR,
we do that. We have the data, and of course, maybe about cars and petrol, we don't have the full data, perhaps, but that's the answer. So let's not look at categorizing different sectors. Everyone pays a certain rate, and then you help through other means. That is the way it should be going, and not creating multiple layers. You pay market, you pay subsidized, you're going to have a lot of abuse. And so the way diesel was done, I think, was pretty good.
Overall, Dr. Verinder, do you like where we are heading as opposed to before? I think taking a step back.
If you're looking at the externalities that have helped us, the ringgit value, the growth GDP, we are on in a good space.
The LCI is on the right right now.
But the issue is it relies a lot on externalities, unfortunately. But I think we need to manage this. I'm happy with the progress. I'm also happy with the way the government is tackling certain issues. We need to step back in terms of populist measures. But I understand where the realities are. We are in a good space, but we need to make sure ministries are cohesively aligned. And this is one of our problems. Silo mentality is very difficult to break. Power in terms of ministries is always a very enshrined in terms of civil service. The civil service, having been given an increase in salary adjustments, now need to step up.
Something to the tune of $10 billion, I think.
So, you need to step up the game, because that actually is a burden on government. It's a burden of future generations if we cannot manage our deficits well in the years to come. So we need to bear that in mind. Civil service has to do more and can do more. They have the capacity and the knowledge, and they need to be empowered.
But
this is the way to do it.
What I want to add is that having done this job, my day job, it's also important for me to point out that the personality of the minister is so important, so much so that the concentration risk of having, I mean, if this puts in a risk register, this would be very, very high.
Yes, so
if you get one competent person, that's good.
Yeah.
But
let me come back to this, because I've been in the ministry for a while when I was in the tax reform committee.
It's scary to have one competent minister, let alone a few.
Correct. But I'm also feel that the deference to the minister decides literally everything, is very, very, to me,
again another example of concentration risk.
Yeah, misplaced, because that creates so much of issues.
Deference to the minister.
Yeah, you cannot. It's like yes, minister, or all the time.
It is.
So you remember that series, and we should play all that very often, because because that's what it is. And this deference to a power, and is interesting because you also see this in GLCs to some extent. I sat on a board of some GLCs, and the way the board is literally God becomes very, very interesting to watch. And that shouldn't be the way, because you should run the business. In fact, the civil servants should run the setup. Ministers are there just to make sure things are running and give instructions where necessary. But don't wait for instructions for everything from the minister. Should I study this? Should we look into this? Should we look? I don't see a reason for that. Civil service can prepare a plan and then put a plan together and submit, and then say, I've got feedback here and there, and this is how it is. And that the minister endorse it. But here, it's every little step. A minister needs to say yes. And something is wrong with that. And I think when you come back to these budgets as well, it's a question. I also realize that it's a one-year plan, as I said. A lot of allocations are not spent, because time is run out, and then you carry it forward. And why is that happening? So therefore, my issue is always about, and maybe one other point. This budget had a number of measures which only will take effect in May, in June, and so on. Even third quarter. That's the first time I'm seeing a budget which has got measures which are so far into the future. And how does that factor into your numbers for projections of revenue expenditure? So that's a bit dangerous, which then tells you that it's too much of consultation is great, feedback is great, but maybe you should do it earlier. I know it's asking too much, but you do it earlier so that by the time you have the budget, you have clarity and you give out everything. Easier to say, but
thank you for acknowledging that the execution is going to be
very tough.
And nobody's going to disagree with you. That's the best part. But then you cakap senang lah, that kind of notion.
Agree. So you start work earlier. Unfortunately, in our ministries, we start work around April to really actively on the budget. Come on, the period is so short. In fact, they should be working on it now for next year's budget, right? So things are that we need to do much better.
It's been a pleasure talking to you, Dr. Berinda, again. So I guess we'll touch base again this time next year if things go according to plan, or not according to plan. But of course, I want to talk to you a lot more when it comes forward. But again, congrats on the job with the KPMG as well as with ICC.
Thank you.
And I hope I wish you all the best.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
If you want to learn more about what Dr. Berinda does, you write a column as well, right?
No, I don't have any more.
Oh, tak ada lah.
LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn.
Okay lah, read lah. But LinkedIn is another problem of toxic positivity.
Yes.
It's just unbelievable. So find out more about this show on astro.com. Just search for The Economy or my name, Ibrahim Sani, on the platform. Until then, catch you in the next one.